So before we start this video guys, be sure to subscribe. We've got a 100 subscriber goal to hit by the end of August and we're making more and more progress every day. Thank you to each and every one of you that's taking the time to do so, and with that, let's get on to the video. Welcome to my new series, The Gaming Deep Dive. In this series we'll be discussing different major franchises, why they became popular, and how they changed over time for the better, or more frequently, for the worse. And yes, every video in this series will have a view goal as a title, as I run through all of my favourite popular series trying to find out which ones still stick, and which ones don't. So, can this video hit 100 views? Let's get right into the deep dive from my favourite series of all time and find out, Assassin's Creed. Don't forget to subscribe. Before we go into the high points and the low points of each franchise, we'll do a concise history of each, from where they started up to present day, not counting spin-offs. With that being said, here's a concise history of Assassin's Creed. The first Assassin's Creed game was released in 2007, starring Altair, the white-robed assassin who became the inspiration and fascination of later assassin Ezio Auditore. Assassin's Creed was set in the Holy Land during the Third Crusade. The next game would come out a couple of years later in 2009, titled Assassin's Creed 2, and went on to become the most acclaimed entry in the series on Metacritic, and by most fans. It starred a young charming Ezio Auditore da Firenze, and took place in Renaissance Italy in the late 15th century. Most of the game is played in Rome, but Ezio makes brief visits to other Italian cities, such as the Assassin Island city of Monteriggioni. This game is remembered for establishing the famous stealth formula of Assassin's Creed, which is carried on until 2015's Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Ezio's trilogy of games will continue in 2010's Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, the second most acclaimed game in the series' history. Brotherhood was set between the years 1500 and 1507, and told the story of Ezio reclaiming the city of Rome from a tyrannical Cesare Borgia, son of previous game antagonist Rodrigo Borgia. The big feature for this game was a multiplayer mode, which was remembered for being fairly shallow, but mostly a bit of fun side content from the main game. The last game in Ezio's trilogy was released in 2011. Assassin's Creed Revelations was a very different game from the previous two entries in the trilogy. It has told a much more lore-focused story of Ezio attempting to find a piece of Eden, while using first game protagonist Altair's notes. It was also a much more somber game than the first two, and tied up the storylines from all three Ezio games, as well as the first game in the series, with Altair playing a guest starring role. The game ended with Ezio finally discovering a piece of Eden, and laying Altair to rest. After those first games in the series, Assassin's Creed started to get a little more uneven. Assassin's Creed 3, released in 2012, starred Connor Kenway, an assassin of Native American descent whose proper name I won't try to say, because I would definitely butcher it. It was set during the American Civil War, and featured a story revolving around a much more open world and a far more personal story, with the antagonist being Connor's birth father, Haytham. Connor was accused of being a boring character, but for the most part, I agree. He rarely talked a huge amount during the game, but when he did, it was never anything hugely interesting. Next in the series, however, was a massive return to form. 2013's Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag was everything I'd ever wanted in an open world game, and Assassin's Creed fit the piracy with the Mediterranean setting surprisingly well. A massive world, a customizable ship, other ships available to plunder aboard, and a long story revolving around Edward Kenway, a merciless but charming Welsh pirate and grandfather to previous protagonist Connor, were the killer features in this game. There was also Freedom Cry, a massive expansion starring Adewale, a former slave come pirate, who rode as his first mate aboard Edward's ship. Black Flag remains the highest rated entry in the series since Brotherhood, and is still played regularly 10 years later. The last game in the series, released on Xbox 360 and PS3, was 2014's Assassin's Creed Rogue. Rogue was an interesting game at face value, as it starred a Templar who left the Assassin Order, Shay Patrick Cormac. The problem was that the game felt like an afterthought to the next game we talk about, which was released during the same year exclusively to next generation consoles. Rogue featured many of the same gameplay features as Black Flag, but they felt toned down, as Rogue was a much shorter game, and featured a far less interesting cast of characters. The first game on next-gen consoles, 2014's Assassin's Creed Unity, was a game that felt like it would have been brilliant if it was released a year later. Set in the 18th century's French Revolution, Assassin's Creed Unity brought a fresh new feel to the same gameplay systems we've been enjoying for years. It was mostly successful in its ambitions. It provided a stunning depiction of Paris, with what is still the most realistic digital recreation of Notre Dame, and features an interesting look at how the Assassin Order worked in and around Paris. The only issue with this game was that it was released on an absolutely appalling state that would have shocked anyone who had pre-ordered into asking their money back. Unity was barely even playable, and there are many YouTube videos out there that show exactly how broken this great but doomed to fail game really was on release. It massively impacted sales, as we see in the next game on the series. 2015's Assassin's Creed Syndicate was the last game in the series that would feature Assassin's Creed's trademark stealth gameplay as part of its core design. Set in Victorian London, starring two of the most obnoxious siblings we've seen in gaming since Wolfenstein Youngblood, Assassin's Creed Syndicate was a perfectly serviceable game about inciting insurrection in London, with a classic Assassin's Creed spin. Unfortunately, Syndicate's sales were very poor, as Unity's broken release after the disappointment of Rogue were enough to derail the franchise in the eyes of some. Something clearly needed to be done to resurrect the series and return it to its former glory, and after a 2-year break, Ubisoft revealed the next big plan for how the future of Assassin's Creed was to look like. 2017's Assassin's Creed Origins changed the series forever. Set in ancient Egypt, this sprawling RPG light was a massive change in the formula for the series. It swapped out the classic stealth gameplay for RPG mechanics and a far more fluid combat system, and added a massive open world to boot. The success of Origins was huge, and it set the foundation for the next few entries as well. It helped that Bayek was an interesting character being the first assassin, and the 2-year gap had helped fans get over their Assassin's Creed oversaturation. The next game in the series would do even more to establish this formula. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was released in 2018 to fantastic critical reviews, and involved every one of the RPG elements that Origins introduced. The gear system was better, the world was bigger and easier to travel, the combat system was far more ability-led and broader. Odyssey was a masterpiece of a game, and Alexios and Cassandra blew fans away with a story of family and personal tragedy, all set to a backdrop of the Peloponnesian War. Lastly, we have the most recent game in the series, at least until later this year, with 2020's Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Valhalla was released to mostly positive critical reviews, but mostly due to the Viking setting and its sheer size, became the best-selling Assassin's Creed game of all time. It was the longest Assassin's Creed game released yet, and featured a far more refined gear system from Odyssey's Gear Abundance, along with a far longer skill tree. Valhalla also released a massive DLC expansion, Dawn of Ragnarok, just last year, which is an interesting remix of the formula established in the main game. Overall, Valhalla was a massive success for Ubisoft, and that's where the series is now, at the height of its popularity, with Assassin's Creed Mirage releasing this October. That's a relatively brief history of Assassin's Creed, so let's move on to exactly where I thought the high point in this franchise was, along with its low points. So where was the high point in the series? Well, that's very down to personal preference. With this series it's veered so much between radically different styles. I think it just depends on what style you prefer. If you prefer the classic stealth gameplay, then the high point for you is Assassin's Creed 2. The second game in the series is often pointed to as the frontrunner for establishing the series format, as well as the best story of any other game in the franchise. It all comes back to Ezio, as he's consistently the best assassin we've had so far, in both ability and in character. If you prefer the new RPG style of game, then the high point of the series for you is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It's the perfect midpoint between the shorter Origins and the comparatively gargantuan Valhalla, as well as having the sharpest gear system and skill tree. It's also the most consistently rewarding of the three, with the story and mercenary systems providing many opportunities for player progression and satisfaction. My personal high point, and in my opinion the high point of the series, is Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. It's a perfect mix between the stealth gameplay of the original games and the RPG systems of the newer games. It walks a fine balance between being a linear character-focused story game and an open world game, and nails the mechanics you expect to have in a game revolving around pirates. It offers the best representation of the piracy we've ever seen in gaming, along with the addition of Assassin's Creed lore to make the game feel, well, more assassiny. Black Flag is a game that allows you to live out your fantasy, your way, and that's why I've chosen it to be my franchise high point. It's come to the point of the video where we discuss whether Assassin's Creed as a series has evolved or devolved. In a lot of series, there's often a point where games have obviously worsened in quality. Of course, I have to start my series with an awkward one, as Assassin's Creed just doesn't really obviously go downhill or uphill. It just changes to be a very different game, and it's all about whether you consider the new games better or worse than the older ones. Other metrics that are often used to consider whether games have gotten any worse, or whether the games have become more exploitative in their microtransactions. Overall, I'd say that Assassin's Creed has definitely become more exploitative, but not enough that it damages the replayability of the games. There are now XP boosters in the recent game stores, as well as character skins and more DLCs. The games are also more expensive than ever due to inflation. I don't think that any of these point to a definite degradation in the game's enjoyability though. They're just added extras that you can choose to invest in if you fancy. That's why it's so hard to say that Assassin's Creed has improved as a series. I'm going to say that while Assassin's Creed has certainly evolved with the times and trends, it's definitely lost a part of itself and its identity along the way. So where does Assassin's Creed go from here? Well, the next game to release is October's Assassin's Creed Mirage, which promises to be a return to the classic stealth-inspired gameplay of older Assassin's Creed games. It'll be interesting to see how this one goes down, both with critics and with fans, as I'm sure it'll directly affect the next few games that are scheduled to release in the next few years. Down the line we have Assassin's Creed codenamed Jade, a mobile hack and slash game due to release at some point soon, as well as codenames Red and Hexy, which will be mainline RPGs set in Japan and during the Witch Trials. I think that Assassin's Creed codenamed Red will be the one to watch here. The feudal Japan era it's set in leaves many opportunities to combine the two styles of gameplay, and I can only imagine how fun it will be to play as a ninja assassin. I'm very much looking forward to the next chapter of the Assassin's Creed saga, and I think it will be incredibly interesting to watch, just as we see how it evolves. Only time will tell if Ubisoft have invested the money wisely, but until then, Assassin's Creed Mirage releases in October this year. Stay tuned on that one, folks. What did you think of this video? Do you think that Black Flag is the true high point of the series? And where do you see the series going in future? Let me know down in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye bye.